Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Chapter 14. Sahovacha ye yesha dehatmamaninam sattvadiguna vikalpita kushala samavahara nirvinmita vividhaye hava libhirviyoga samyogadhyanadhi samsaranubhavasya द्वारा भूतेन षडिन्द्रिय वर्गेण तस्मिन् दुर्गाद्ववधसुगमे ध्वन्यापतित ईश्वरस्य भगवतो विष्णोर्वशवर्तिन्यां मायया जीवलोकोऽयं यथा वणिक्सार्थोऽर्थपरः स्वदेह निष्पादित कर्मानुभवः शमशानवध शिवतमायां संसाराटव्यं गतो नाद्यापि विफलबहुप्रतियोगेहस्तत्तापोपशमनी हरिगुणचरणारविन्दमधुकरानुपदवीं वरुन्दे. When King Parikshit asked Sukadeva Goswami about the direct meaning of the material forest, Sukadeva Goswami replied as follows. My dear king, a man belonging to the mercantile community, Vainik, is always interested in earning money. Sometimes he enters the forest to acquire some cheap commodities like wood and earth and sell them in the city at good prices. Similarly, the conditioned soul, being greedy, enters this material world for some material profit. Gradually, he enters the deepest part of the forest, not really knowing how to get out. Having entered the material world, the pure soul becomes conditioned by the material atmosphere, which is created by the external energy under the control of Lord Vishnu. Thus, the living entity comes under the control of the external energy, Daivi Maya. Living independently and bewildered in the forest, he does not attain the association of devotees who are always engaged in the service of the Lord. Once in the bodily conception, he gets different types of bodies, one after the other, until the influence of material energy and impelled by the modes of material nature, Sattva Guna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna. In this way, the conditioned soul goes sometimes to the heavenly planets, and sometimes to the earthly planets, and sometimes to the lower planets and lower species. Thus, he suffers continuously due to different types of bodies. These sufferings and pains are sometimes mixed. Sometimes they are very severe, sometimes they are not. These bodily conditions are acquired due to the conditioned soul's mental speculation. He uses his mind and five senses to acquire knowledge, and these bring about different bodies and different conditions. Using the senses under the control of external energy, Maya, the living entity, suffers the miserable conditions of material existence. He is actually searching for relief, but he is generally baffled, although sometimes he is relieved after great difficulty. Struggling for existence in this way, he cannot get the shelter of pure devotees who are like bumblebees engaged in loving service at the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. यस्यामुहावायेते षडिन्द्रियनामानः कर्मणाधस्य व एव ते तद्यथा पुरुषस्य धनं यत्किञ्चिद्धर्मौपैकं बहुकृच्छ्राधिगतं साक्षात् परमपुरुषाराधन लक्षणो योऽसौ धर्मस्थं तु साम्पराय उदाहरन्ति तद्धर्म्यं धनं स्वादनावघ्राणसङ्कल्प व्यवसाय गृह ग्राम्योपभोगेन कुनार्थस्याजितात्मनो यथा सार्थस्य विलुम्पन्ति. In the forest of material existence, the uncontrolled senses are like plunderers. The conditioned soul may earn some money for the advancement of Krishna consciousness, but unfortunately, the uncontrolled senses plunder his money through sense gratification. The senses are plunderers because they make one spend his money unnecessarily for seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, desiring, and willing. In this way, the conditioned soul is obliged to gratify his senses, and thus all his money is spent. This money is actually acquired for the execution of religious principles, but it is taken away by plundering senses. अत च यत्र कौटुम्बिका दारपत्याधयो नाम्ना कर्मणा वृकसृगाला एवानिच्चतोऽपि कदर्यस्य कुटुम्बिन उरणकवत्संक्ष्यमाणं मिषेतोऽपि haranti. My dear king, family members in this material world go under the names of wife and children, but actually they behave like tigers and jackals. The herdsman tries to protect his sheep to the best of his ability, but the tigers and foxes take them away by force. Similarly, although a miserly man wants to guard his money very carefully, his family members take away all his assets forcibly, even though he is very vigilant. Yata hyanuvatsaram krishyamānamapyadagdhabhijam kshetram punarevavapanakale gulma trunavirudbhil gahvaramiva bhavatyevameva gruhashramaha karmakshetram यस्मिन्नहि कर्माण्युत्सीदन्ति यदयं कामकरण्ड एष आवसतः. Every year, the plowman plows over his grain field, completely uprooting all weeds. Nonetheless, the seeds lie there and, not being completely burned, once again up with the plants sown in the fields. Even after being plown under the weeds, every year the plowman plows over his grain field, completely uprooting all weeds. Nonetheless, the seeds lie there and, not being completely burned, once again come up with plants sown in the field. Even after being plowed under, the weeds come up densely. Similarly, the grihasthashrama, family life, is a field of fruitive activity. Unless the desire to enjoy family life is completely burned out, it grows up again and again. Even though camphor may be removed from the pot nonetheless retains the aroma of camphor. As long as the seeds of desire are not destroyed, fruitive activities are not destroyed. तत्र गतो दंशमशकसमाप सधैर्मनुजैः शलभशकुन्ततस्कर मूषकादिभिरुपरुद्यमान बहिः प्राणः क्वचित् परिवर्तमानोऽस्मिन् नध्वन्यविद्याकाम कर्मभिरुपरक्त मनसानुपपन्नार्थं नरलोकं गन्धर्वनगरमुपपन्नमिति मिथ्यादृष्टिरनुपश्यति. Sometimes the conditioned soul in the household life, being attached to material wealth and positions, is disturbed by gadflies and mosquitoes, and sometimes locusts, birds of prey, rats give him trouble. Nonetheless, he still wanders down the path of material existence. Due to ignorance, he becomes lusty and engages in fruitive activity. Because his mind is absorbed in these activities, he sees material world as permanent, although it is temporary, like a phantasmagoria, a house in the sky. Tatra cha क्वचिदातपोधक कनिभान् विषयानुपधावति पानभोजनव्यवायाधिव्यसनलोलुपः. Sometimes in this house, in the sky, Gandharvapura, the conditioned soul drinks, eats, and has sex. Being overly attached, he chases after objects of senses, just as a deer chases a mirage in the forest. क्वचिच्चाशेषदोषनिषदनं परीश विशेषं तद्वर्णगुणनिर्मितमतिः सुवर्णमुपादित्सत्यग्निकामकातर इवोल्मुखपिशाचम्. Sometimes the living entity is interested in the yellow stool known as gold and runs after it. That gold is a source of material opulence and envy, and it can enable one to afford illicit sex, gambling, meat eating, and intoxication. Those whose minds are overcome by the mode of passion are attracted by the color of gold, just as a man suffering from cold in the forest runs after phosphorescent light in a marshy land, considering it to be fire. अत कदाचिन्निवासपानीयद्रविणाद्यनेकात्मोपजीवनाभिनिवेश एतस्यां संसाराटव्यामितस्ततः परिधावति. Sometimes the conditioned soul is absorbed in finding residential quarters or apartments and getting a supply of water and riches to maintain his body. Absorbed in acquiring a variety of necessities, he forgets everything and perpetually runs around the forest of material existence. Kvachicca vatyaupamyaya pramadaya rajasa rajanibhuta ivasadyumaryadho rajaswalakshopi digdevata atirajaswala martina vijanati. Sometimes, as if blinded by the dust of a whirlwind, the conditioned soul sees the beauty of the opposite sex, which is called pramada. Being thus bewildered, he is raised upon the lap of a woman and at that time his good senses are overcome by the force of passion. He thus becomes almost blind with the lusty desire and disobeys the rules and regulations governing sex life. He does not know that this he does not know that his disobedience is witnessed by different demigods, and he elicits and he enjoys illicit sex in the dead of the night, not seeing the future punishment awaiting him. क्वचित् सकृतव गतविशेषय वैतस्त्यः स्वयं पराभिध्यानेन बिभ्रंशितस्मृतिस्तयैव मरीचितोऽयप्रायांस्तानेवाभिधावति. The conditioned soul sometimes personally appreciates the futility of sense enjoyment in the material world, and he sometimes considers material enjoyment to be full of miseries. However, due to his strong bodily conception, his memory is destroyed, and again he runs after material enjoyment, just as an animal runs after a mirage in the desert. क्वचिदुल्लूकझिल्लीस्वनवदति पुरुषरभसाटोपं प्रत्यक्षं परोक्षं वा रिपुराजकुलनिर्भित्स्थितेनातिव्यथितकर्णमूलहृदयः. Sometimes the conditioned soul is very aggrieved by the chastisement of his enemies and government servants, who use harsh words against him directly or indirectly. At that time, his heart and ears become very saddened. Such chastisement may be compared to the sounds of owls and crickets. स यदा दुग्धपूर्व सुकृतस्तदा कारस्करकाकतुण्डाध्यपुण्यद्रुमलता विशोधपानवधूम यार्तशून्यद्रविणान् जीवन्मृतान् स्वयं जीवन्म्रियमाण उपधावति. Due to his pious activities in previous lives, the conditioned soul attains material facilities in this life, but when they are finished, he takes shelter of wealth and riches, which cannot help him in this life or the next. Because of this, he approaches the living dead who possess these things. Some such people are compared to impure trees, creepers, and poisonous wells. एकदा सत्प्रसंगान् निकृतमतिव्युध कस्त्रोत्रः सस्खल नवद उभयतोपि दुःखदं पाकण्डमभियाति. Sometimes, to mitigate distress in the forest of material world, the conditioned soul receives cheap blessings from atheists. He then loses all intelligence in their association. This is exactly like jumping in a shallow river. As a result, one simply breaks his head. He is not able to mitigate his suffering from the heat, and in both ways he suffers. The misguided conditioned soul also approaches so-called sadhus and swamis who preach against principles of Vedas. He does not receive benefit from them either in the present or in the future. Yada tu parabhadayandha atmane nopanamati tadahi pitru putra barhishmataha pitru putran vasa khalu bhakshayanti. In this material world, when the conditioned soul cannot arrange for his own maintenance, despite exploiting others, he tries to exploit his own father or son, taking away the relatives' possessions although they may be very insignificant. If he cannot acquire things from his father, son, or other relatives, he is prepared to give them all kinds of trouble. क्वचिदासाद्य गृहं धाववत्प्रियार्थविधुर मसुकोदर्कं शोकाग्निना दह्यमानो भृशं निर्वेदमुपगच्छति. In this world, family life is exactly like a blazing fire in the forest. There is not the least happiness, and gradually one becomes more and more implicated in unhappiness. In the household life, there is nothing favorable for perpetual happiness. Being implicated in home life, the conditioned soul is burned by fire of lamentation. Sometimes he condemns himself as being very unfortunate, and sometimes he claims that he suffers because he performed no pious activities in his previous life. क्वचित् काल विषमितराजकुल रक्षसापहृत प्रियतमध्यानसुः प्रमुतकः इव विगतजीवलक्षण आस्ते. Government men are always like carnivorous demons called Rakshasas, meat eaters. Sometimes these government men turn against the conditioned soul and take away all his accumulated wealth. Being bereft of his life's reserved wealth, the conditioned soul loses all enthusiasm. Indeed, it is as though he loses his life. Kadachin manoratopagata pitrupita mahadhyasatsadhiti swapna nirvruti lakshanama nubhavati. Sometimes the conditioned soul imagines that his father or grandfather has again come in the form of his son or grandson. In this way, he feels the happiness one sometimes feels in a dream, and the conditioned soul sometimes takes pleasure in such mental concoctions. क्वचिद् गृहाश्रम कर्म चोदनाति भगघीरिमारु रुक्ष्ममाणो लोकव्यसन कर्षितमनाः कशर्कराक्षेत्रं प्रविशन्निव सीधति. In this household life, one is ordered to execute many yajnas and fruitive activities, especially the Vivaha Yajna, the marriage ceremony for sons and daughters, and the sacred thread ceremony. These are all duties of a Gruhastha, and they are very extensive and troublesome to execute. They are compared to a big hill over which one must cross when one is attached to material activities. The person desiring to cross over these ritualistic ceremonies certainly feels pain like the piercing of thorns and pebbles endured by one attempting to climb a hill. Thus the conditioned soul suffers unlimitedly. Kvachicchadhu sahena kayabhyanantara vahnina gruhita saraha swakutumbhaya krudhyati. Sometimes, due to the bodily hunger and thirst, the conditioned soul becomes so disturbed that he loses his patience and becomes angry with his own beloved sons, daughters, and wife. Thus, being unkind to them, he suffers all the more. Sayeva punarnidra jagara gruhitondhe tamasi magnaha शून्यारण्य इव क्षेत्रे नान्यत् किंचन वेद शव इवापविधः. Shukadeva Goswami continued speaking to Maharaja Parikshit. My dear king, sleep is exactly like a python. Those who wander in the forest of material life are always devoured by the python of sleep. Being bitten by this python, They always remain in the darkness of ignorance. They are like dead bodies thrown in a distant forest. Thus, the conditioned souls cannot understand what is going on in life. कदाचिद्भग्नमानधंष्ट्रो दुर्जनदन्धशूकैरलब्धनिद्राक्षणो व्यथितहृदयेनानुक्षीयमाणविज्ञानोन्धकूपेन्धवत् In the forest of material world, the conditioned soul is sometimes bitten by envious enemies, which are compared to serpents and other creatures. Through the tricks of the enemy, the conditioned soul falls from his prestigious position. Being anxious, he cannot even sleep properly. Thus, he becomes more and more unhappy, and he gradually loses his intelligence and consciousness. In the state, he becomes almost perpetually like a blind man who has fallen into the dark well of ignorance. Karhisma chitkamamadhulavan विचिन्वन् यथा परदारपरद्रव्याण्य वरुन्धानो राज्ञा स्वामिभिर्वा निहतः पतत्यपारे niraye. The conditioned soul is sometimes attracted to the little happiness derived from sense gratification. Thus, he has illicit sex or steals another's property. At such a time, he may be arrested by the government or chastised by the woman's husband or protector. Thus, simply for a little material satisfaction, he falls into hellish condition and is put in the jail for rape, kidnapping, theft, and so forth. Atacha tasmadubhayathapi hi karmasminnatmanah samsaravapanamudhaharanti. Learned scholars and transcendentalists therefore condemn the materialistic path of fruitive activity because it is the original source and breeding ground of material miseries, both in this life and the next. Muktastato yadhi bandhadev datta upachinnati tasmadapi Vishnumitra ityanavastitihi. Stealing or cheating another person out of his money, the conditioned soul somehow or the other, keeps it in his possession and escapes punishment. Then another man named Devadatta cheats him and takes the money away. Similarly, another man named Vishnumitra steals the money from Devadatta and takes it away. In any case, the money does not stay in one place. It passes from one hand to another. Ultimately, no one can enjoy the money and it remains the property of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Kvachiccha shitavataadhyanekadidhaivika bhautikatmiyanam dashanam pratinivarane kalpo duranta chintaya vishanna aste. Being unable to protect himself from the threefold miseries of material existence, the conditioned soul becomes very morose and lives a life of lamentation. These threefold miseries are miseries suffered by mental calamity at the hands of the demigods, such as freezing wind and scorching heat, miseries offered by other living entities, and miseries arising from the mind and body themselves. Kvachinmito vyavaharan yatkinchidhanamanyebhyo va kakina kamatramapyapaharan yatkinchidva vidveshameti vittashatyat. As far as transactions with money are concerned, if a person cheats another by farting or less, they become enemies. Advanyamushminnima upasargastata sukha dukkha रागद्वेष भयाभिमान प्रमादोन्माद शोकमोहलोभमात्सर्येष्य मात्सर्येष्यावमान क्षुत्पिपासाधिव्याधि जन्म जरामरणधयः. In this materialistic life, there are many difficulties, as I have just mentioned, and all of these are insurmountable. In addition, there are difficulties arising from the so-called happiness, distress, attachment, hate, fear, false prestige, illusion, madness, lamentation, bewilderment, greed, envy, enmity, insult, hunger, thirst, tribulation, disease, birth, old age, and death. All these combine together to give the materialistic conditioned soul nothing but misery. क्वपि देवमायया स्त्रिया भुजलतोपगूढः प्रस्कन्न विवेक विज्ञानो यद्विहार गृहारभ्याकुलहृदयस्तदाश्रयावसक्तसुधा दुहितु कलत्रभाषितावलोकपि हृदय आत्मानमजितात्मापारेन्द्रे तमसि prahinoti. Sometimes the conditioned soul is attracted by illusion personified, his wife or girlfriend, and becomes eager to be embraced by a woman. Thus he loses his intelligence as well as knowledge of life's goal. At that time, no longer attempting spiritual cultivation, he becomes overly attached to wife or girlfriend and tries to provide her with suitable apartment. Again, he becomes very busy under the shelter of that home and is captivated by the talks, glances, activities of his wife and children. In this way, he loses the Krishna consciousness and throws himself in the dense darkness of material existence. Kadachidishwarasya bhagavato vishnoshchakrat paramanvadhi dviparardhapavarga कालोपलक्षणात् परिवर्तितेन वयसा रंहसा हरत आब्रह्म तृष्णस्तंभादीनां भूतानाम् मिशतां विक्रस्तहृदयस्तमेवेश्वरं कालचक्र निजायुधं साक्षात् भगवन्तं यज्ञपुरुष मनाधृत्य पाकण्डदेवताः कङ्कगृध्र भक वटप्राया आर्य समय परिहृताः सांकेत्येनाभिधत्ते. The personal weapon used by Lord Krishna, the disc, is called Hari Chakra, the disc of Hari. This chakra is the wheel of time. It expands from beginning of atoms up to the time of Brahma's death, and it controls all activities. It is always revolving and spending the lives of living entities, from Lord Brahma down to the insignificant blade of grass. Thus, one changes from infancy to childhood, to youth and maturity, and thus one approaches the end of life. It is important to check this wheel of time. This wheel is very exacting because it is the personal weapon of Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes the conditioned soul, fearing the approach of death, wants to worship someone who can save him from imminent danger. Yet he does not care for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose weapon is the indefatigable time factor. The controlled soul instead takes shelter of a man-made god described in unauthorized scriptures. Such gods are like buzzards, vultures, and herons and crows. Vedic scriptures do not refer to them. Imminent death is like the attack of a lion, and neither vultures, buzzards, crows, nor herons can save one from such an attack. One who takes shelter of unauthorized, man made gods cannot be saved from the clutches of death. यदा पाखण्डिभिरात्म वञ्चितैस्तैरुरु वञ्चितो ब्रह्मकुलं समावसंस्तेषां शीलमुपनय नाधिशौतस्मार्तकर्मानुष्ठानेन भगवतो यज्ञपुरुषस्याराधनमेव तदरोचयन् शूद्रकुलं भजते निगमाचारेषु धितो यस्य मिथुनी भावः कुटुम्बभरणं यथा वानरजातेः. The pseudo-swamis, yogis and incarnations who do not believe in the Supreme Personality of Godhead are known as Pashandis. They themselves are fallen and cheated because they do not know the real path of spiritual advancement, and whoever goes to them is certainly cheated in his turn. When one is thus cheated, he sometimes takes shelter of the real followers of Vedic principles, Brahmanas or those of Krishna consciousness, who teach everyone how to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead according to the Vedic rituals. However, being able to stick to these principles, these rascals again fall down and take shelter among Shudras who are very expert in making arrangements of sex indulgence. Sex is very prominent among animals like monkeys, and such people who are enlivened by sex may be called descendants of the monkeys. Tatrapi niravrodha svairena viharannati krupana buddhiranyonyamukha nirikshanadhina gramya karmanaiva vismrutakalavadhihi. In this way, the descendants of the monkeys intermingle with each other, and they are generally known as Sudras. Without hesitating, they live and move freely, not knowing the goal of life. They are captivated simply by seeing the faces of one another, which remind them of sense gratification. They are always engaged in material activities known as Gramya Karma, and they work hard for material benefit. Thus, they forget completely that one day these small lifespans will be finished and they will be degraded in the evolutionary cycle. Kvachid drumavadaihi karteshu gruheshu ramsyan yata vanara sutadhara vatsalo vyavayakshanaha. Just as a monkey jumps from one tree to another, the conditioned soul jumps from one body to another. As the monkey is ultimately captured by the hunter and is unable to get out of captivity, the conditioned soul becomes captivated by momentary sex pleasure, becomes attached to different types of bodies, and is engaged in family life. Family life affords the conditioned soul a festival of momentary sex pleasures, and thus he is completely unable to get out of material clutches. Evamadvanyavardhano mrityu gajabhayattamasi girikandhara praye. In this material world, when the conditioned soul forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and does not care for Krishna consciousness, he simply engages in different types of mischievous and sinful activities. He is then subjected to the threefold miseries, and out of fear of elephant of death, he falls into the darkness found in the mountain cave. Kvachichitavata dhaneka daivika bhautikatmiyanam dukkhanam prati nivarane kalpo Duranta Vishaya Vishana Aste. The conditioned soul suffers many miserable bodily conditions, such as being affected by severe cold and strong winds. He also suffers due to the activities of other living beings and due to the natural disturbances. When he is unable to counteract them and has to remain in miserable condition, he naturally becomes very morose because he wants to enjoy material facilities. क्वचिन्मितो व्यवहरन् यत्किञ्चिद्धनमुपयाति वित्तशाट्येन. Sometimes conditioned souls exchange money, but in due course of time, enmity arises because of cheating. Although there may be tiny profit, the conditioned souls cease to be friends and become enemies. क्वचित् क्षीणधन शय्यासनाशनध्युपभोगविहीनो यावदप्रतिलब्धमनोरथोपगता दानेव सितमतिस्ततस्ततोऽवमानादीनि जनादभिलसते. Sometimes, having no money, the conditioned soul does not get sufficient accommodations. Sometimes he doesn't even have a place to sit, nor does he have the other necessities. In other words, he falls into scarcity, and at that time he is unable to secure the necessities by fair means. He decides to seize the property of others unfairly. When he cannot get the things he wants, he simply receives insults from others and thus becomes very morose. Evam vitavyati shanga विवृद्धवैरानुबन्धोऽपि पूर्ववासनया मिथ उद्वहत्यथा pavahati. Although people may be enemies, in order to fulfill their desires again and again, they sometimes get married. Unfortunately, their marriages do not last very long, and the people involved are separated again by divorce or other means. एतस्मिन् संसाराध्वति नानाक्लेशोपसर्गबाधित आपन्नविपन्नो यत्र यस्तमुह वावेतरस्तत्र विसृज्य जातं जातमुपादाय शोचन्मुह्यन् बिभ्यद्विवदन् क्रन्दन् संहृष्यन् गायन्नह्यमानः साधु वर्जितो नैवावर्ततेऽद्यापि यत आरब्ध एष नरलोकसार्तो यमध्वनः पारमुपदिशन्ति. The path of this material world is full of material miseries, and various troubles disturb the conditioned souls. Sometimes he loses and sometimes he gains. In either case, the path is full of danger. Sometimes the conditioned soul is separated from his father by death or other circumstances. Leaving him aside, he gradually becomes attached to others, just such as children. In this way, the conditioned soul is sometimes illusioned and afraid. Sometimes he cries loudly out of fear. Sometimes he is happy maintaining his family. Sometimes he is overjoyed and sings melodiously. In this way, he becomes entangled and forgets his separation from the Supreme Personality of Godhead since time immemorial. Thus, he traverses the dangerous path of material existence, and on this path, he is not at all happy. Those who are self realized simply take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order to get out of this dangerous material existence. Without accepting the devotional path, one cannot get out of the clutches of material existence. The conclusion is that no one can be happy in material life. One must take to Krishna consciousness. Yadidam yoganuशासनम न वा एतदवरुन्धते यन्यस्तदण्डमुनय उपशमशील उपरतात्मानः samavagachanti. Saintly persons who are friends of all living entities have a peaceful consciousness. They have controlled their senses and minds, and they easily attain the path of liberation, the path back to Godhead. But being unfortunate and attached to miserable material conditions, the materialistic person cannot associate with them. Yadhapi digibhajayan यद्यपि दिगिभजयिनो यज्विनो ये वै राजर्षयः किं नु परं मृधे शयीरन्नस्यामेव ममेयमिति कृतवैरानुबन्धायां विसृज्य स्वयमुपसंहृताः. There were many great saintly kings who were very expert in performing sacrificial rituals and very competent in conquering other kingdoms. Yet, despite their power, they could not attain the loving service of Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is because those great kings could not even conquer the false consciousness of I am this body and this is my property. Thus, they simply created enmity with rival kings, fought with them, and died without having discharged real mission. Karmavalli mavalabhya tata apadaha patanchinnarakaadvimuktaha punarapyevam samsaradvani vartamano varalokasaartamupayati swamupari gatopi. When the conditioned souls accept the shelter of the creeper of fruitive activity, he may be elevated by his pious activities to higher planetary systems and thus gain liberation from hellish conditions. But unfortunately, he cannot remain there. After reaping the results of his pious activities, he has to return to the lower planetary systems. In this way, he perpetually goes up and comes down. Tasyedamupagayanti arshabhasyeha rajarsher manasapi mahatmanaha nanu vartmarhati nrupo makshikevam gurutmanah makshikeva garutmataha. Having summarized the teachings of Jadabharata, Sukadeva Goswami said, My dear King Parikshit, the path indicated by Jadabharata is like the path followed by Garuda, the carrier of the Lord, and the ordinary kings are just like flies. Flies cannot follow the path of Garuda, and to date, none of the great kings and victorious leaders could follow the path of devotional service, not even mentally. Yo dhustyajan dhara sutan suhrudrajyam hrudis prushaha jahau yuvaiva malavaduttamashlokalalasaha. Yo dushtyajan dara sutan suhrudrajyam hrudis prushaha jahau yuvaiva malavaduttamashlokalalasaha. While in the prime of life, the great Maharaja Bharata gave up everything because he was fond of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Uttama Shloka. He gave up his beautiful wife, nice children, great friends, and enormous empire. Although these things were difficult to give up, Maharaja Bharata was so exalted that he gave them up just as one gives up stool after evacuating. Such was the greatness of his majesty. योधुस्त्यजान् क्षिति श्रुतस्वजनार्तधारान् प्रार्त्यां श्रियं सुरवरैः सदयावलोकां नैच्छन्नपस्तदुचितं महतां मधुद्विटमिटस्ते से मधुद्विटस्येवानुरक्तमनसाम भवोऽपि पल्गुः. Sukadeva Goswami continued, My dear king, the activities of Bharata Maharaja are wonderful. He gave up everything difficult for others to give up. He gave up his kingdom, his wife, his family. His opulence was so great that even the demigods envied it, yet he gave it up. It was quite befitting a great personality like him to be a great devotee. He could renounce everything because he was so attached to the beauty, opulence, reputation, knowledge, strength, and renunciation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna is so attractive that no one can give up all the desirable things for his sake. Indeed, even liberation is considered insignificant for those whose minds are attached to the loving service of the Lord. यज्ञाय धर्मपतये विधिनैपुण्यान् यज्ञाय धर्मपतये विधिनैपुणाय योगाय सांख्याशितसे प्रकृतीश्वराय नारायणाय हरये नमः इत्युदारं हास्यन्मृगत् Tvamapi yah samudajahara. Even though in the body of a deer, Maharaja Bharata did not forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, when he was giving up the body of the deer, he loudly uttered the following prayer. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is sacrifice personified. He gives the results of ritualistic activities. He is the protector of religious systems, the personification of mystic yoga, the source of all knowledge, the controller of the entire creation, and the super soul in every living entity. He is beautiful and attractive. I am quitting this body, offering obeisances unto him, and hoping that I may perpetually engage in his transcendental loving service. Uttering this, Maharaja Bharata left his body. Ya idam bhagavata samajitavadata gunakarmano rajarsher bharatasyanucharitam swastyayana mayushyam dhanam यशस्यं स्वर्गापवर्गं वानुशृणोत्याख्यास्यत्यभिनन्दति स सर्वा एवाशिष आत्मन आशास्तेन काञ्चन परम् इति. Devotees interested in hearing and chanting Shravanam Kirtanam regularly discuss the pure characteristics of Bharata Maharaja and praise his activities. If one submissively hears and chants about all auspicious Maharaja Bharata, one's lifespan and material opulences certainly increase. One can become very famous and easily attain promotion to the heavenly planets or attain liberation by merging into the existence of the Lord. Whatever one desires can be attained simply by hearing, chanting and glorifying the activities of Maharaja Bharata. In this way, one can fulfill all his material and spiritual desires. One does not have to ask anyone else for these things, for simply by studying the life of Maharaja Bharata, one can attain all desirable things. Thus ends the chapter entitled The Material World as the Great Forest of Enjoyment. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.